Creating wealth is really just an equation between these three variables: time, income, and return. And the beautiful thing about creating wealth is that you don't need a lot of all three. You just need a good amount of one. If you have high income, well, you don't need a lot of time or a high return to create wealth. But if instead you have a high return or a good amount of time, then you don't need a high income. And as the title hints to, that second part is going to be the main focus of today's video. How to create wealth even if you don't have a lot of income. So without wasting any time, as always, my name is Derek and I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. Let's get started. We're going to approach this video from an investing standpoint, because if instead we come at this from a business standpoint, like creating a product or service, then we are more so talking about increasing your income, which of course is absolutely possible. And if you want me to make a video on that, please let me know. And as someone who's ran a pretty successful business over the last 7 years, I would absolutely love to share that information with you. But in this video, let's focus on the other two variables: return and time. Becoming wealthy when it comes to these two variables of return and time becomes a ratio, really. To end up in the same place, a very wealthy person, you need to increase one of these two variables, which will give you room to decrease the other. And this leads us to the two main talking points for this video: active investing and passive investing. First, active investing, also known as trading, depending on whether your focus is on fundamental or technical analysis. Now, before I risk throwing way too many big and honestly words that are meant to be confusing on purpose, like technical and fundamental, let's simplify this. Active investing, which means you're actively analyzing and choosing which stocks end up in your investment portfolio, would find itself on the side of this ratio of more return as opposed to more time. If you want to be wealthy and you want to do that through investing, and you don't have a lot of time or you don't want to wait a lot of time, then active investing may be an option because it can increase your return, allowing you to get to the same place, being a wealthy person, while simultaneously shrinking the other variable, time. But of course, as with all things in life, there are some caveats. The first is, in finance, when you increase return, you also usually increase risk. That's why a fund like VGT, for example, returns more, but is also more volatile than a fund like VOO, because VGT is tech heavy and thus more risky, but also more lucrative, whereas VOO tracks the entire S&P 500. This is a fundamental concept in finance. With that said though, active investing can be more lucrative than the other option of passive investing, which we will talk about. Now, there are people and there are studies that show that active investing does not work for the average person. And that is true. And that brings me to my next caveat. Active investing requires training. It requires your effort to learn one of the two schools of thought, either fundamental analysis or technical analysis, or a combination of the two. Now, simply put, fundamental analysis is the study of the company and its health. Think of this like a doctor analyzing the health of a patient and then investing based on which ones are the healthiest. This type of analysis is something that I was taught, and honestly taught myself, as I was getting my finance degree. It absolutely is useful. And while some people might tell you that it's pointless, those people are usually talking about the average person trying to beat the market return. But at the same time, take it from me, if someone truly learns fundamental analysis and implements it in their investing, there is a good chance that that person will increase their return. How much? Well, you'd be surprised at how much 1, 2, or 3% will cut down your time when it comes to making money through investing, let alone doubling the average yearly return. But maybe I should stop here before people in the comments start calling blasphemy on me for saying that it's very possible to beat the market average if you actually spend a little bit of time learning. Ask me how I know. Okay, what about technical analysis? What is that? Well, think of it instead as someone trying to best figure out how to build a mall or a shopping center based on people's interests and how they act. Where do you put the food court or the bathrooms or the parking? Well, you can have a general idea of where simply because people tend to act similarly when placed in similar places or situations. So a bathroom near a food court might be a good idea, or a coffee shop in the center of the plaza for a short break while shopping might be a good option. And a gas station near the exit of the parking lot might be a smart play as well. You see, technical analysis is not what most people will tell you or what they think it is, the study of charts. No, technical analysis is the study of people, of human emotion and behavior. Technical analysis is investing based on the known fact that people will do similar things when placed in similar situations. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into either one of these concepts because both fundamental and technical analysis each would take way longer than a 10 or 20-minute video to cover properly. With that said, if you know who I am or you followed me for a while, then you know that I absolutely love active investing. And I have plenty of resources covering it, like my free 4-hour-long crash course on investing. So for those of you that are interested in this style of investing, that is a great place for more in-depth knowledge on this subject, which you can feel free to check out after this video. Now, for everyone, before we move on to passive investing, just understand this. Creating a business or a product can increase the income variable to this equation, and active investing can increase the return variable, although it can be more risky. And passive investing, instead, to get you to the same place, a wealthy person relies on the remaining variable, which is time. Okay, let's talk about the method that's basically guaranteed to make you a millionaire. Now, this method seems to be simultaneously talked about way too much and at the same time completely ignored. And that's because the previous two things we've talked about, creating a business and active investing, are more exciting and can work. And if they work, they can give you quicker results. So unfortunately, because of the instant gratification society that we live in, those tend to be hyped up much more. With that said, while the pro is that they are quicker, the con is that neither of those two previous methods are guaranteed. You might create a successful business, and you might learn how to actively invest good enough to become a millionaire sooner. But passive investing with enough time is all but 100% guaranteed to make you a millionaire. And if it doesn't, well, then that means we probably have much more serious issues to deal with, like a collapsed society. Why? Well, because every retirement account, 401k, pension plan, Roth IRA, and even Social Security are all based on the idea that passive investing works. So in a world that it doesn't, we're all screwed. Okay, let's talk about passive investing and how you can even combine a little bit of active investing in there to beat the market average. So passive investing is just what it sounds like. Picking some stocks and investing in them, usually on a recurring basis, usually monthly, and then forgetting about them for years. And when I say stocks, I actually mean funds, usually exchange traded funds. And yes, don't worry, at the end I will give you my favorites and why. But before we get there, the reason why passive investing is basically guaranteed to work is because we have a very long history with the stock market. So we can see with relative certainty the average returns it tends to generate on a yearly basis. And at that point, becoming a millionaire really is just an equation. And in fact, there already are calculators online, just like this one, that will allow you to put in the variables, like how much money you're investing and how much extra you're adding on a recurring basis, and the return that you expect to generate. And these calculators can be pretty accurate. Why? Again, because of how much data we have historically when it comes to the stock market and investing in it. Now, I am oversimplifying. Nothing is guaranteed, and past results do not indicate future performance. But at the same time, this is as close to guaranteed as it gets. Okay, now let's talk about these exchange traded funds. The reason these funds, known also as ETFs, work is because they spread your risk over many different stocks. This is known as diversification, while still allowing you to invest and make an average return. Now, the general common knowledge is to invest in what's known as a market tracking fund, which basically tracks the entire stock market or a big portion of it. For example, VOO, which we mentioned briefly earlier, is an ETF, and it tracks the S&P 500, which are the largest 500 companies in the US stock market. And the reason this is the common theory is because something like the S&P 500 has a relatively stable and well-known average return, about 10% or so per year. When you are talking about longer time frames, say 10 plus years, and that is where the time component comes in to this last method. 10 plus years. It takes time for these returns to compound on themselves and create millions. Could you take a $10 million loan out, stick it in something like the VOO, get your 10% return, and there's your million? Maybe, but the problem with that is that average returns are not yearly returns. One year, VOO might return 40%, and then the very next year, it might lose 15%. But that 2-year average is still pretty close to the average annual return of 10%. And that is why time is so important with this last method. You need time to allow these returns to average themselves out. Okay, now let's do the fun stuff. Let's do some numbers. Say you have a $5,000 initial investment, which to you're going to add $500 more every single month. How long would it take you to become a millionaire? Well, about 28 years, which may sound like a lot, but if this is a doable investment for you, why not? Why not do this while still pursuing other ways at, say, increasing your income? Because the time will pass regardless. But now I want to show you how little changes can make big differences with investing. Let's say instead of $500, you'll add $750 to your initial investment every single month. Well, with that one little change, it now takes 24 years instead of 28 to make you your million. And what if instead you were able to average 12% instead of 10% yearly return? Well, now it'll only take you 22 years. And what if instead you were able to add $1,000 instead of $750 on a monthly basis? Now you're at about 19 and a half years. You see how this method instead uses long time frames of compounding interest, which Albert Einstein once said was the 8th wonder of the world, to create wealth. So basically, each method uses one of the 3 variables to create that million. If you have a very high income and can invest, say, $10,000 every single month, it would only take you 6 years at the average return to create that million. You're leveraging income. But if instead you learned active investing so that you could beat the average market return, contributed say $1,000 every single month, and managed a ridiculously impressive 25% average return per year, you'd have that million in about 12 years. And if instead you leveraged time, you'd still have that million, even without the other 2. It will just take you longer, because the thing that you are leveraging is literally that time. So, what does this mean for you? Well, it means that you now know how to make $1 million, at least the structure of it. But how you get there and what you leverage to do so depends on what you have at your disposal. Do you have high income? Do you have the active investing skills to beat the market average? Or do you have time? Now, I told you that I would also go over a few of my favorite ETFs, so I'm going to do just that. In my opinion, VOO is currently the best, most well-rounded ETF. It tracks the S&P 500, which is not the entire stock market. But that's okay, because it is the top 500 companies, and it's rebalanced as companies grow and shrink. It is an excellent ETF, and it'll get you very close to the historical stock market average return. And because of that, I think most investors should own VOO. The next is VGT. This is a tech-heavy ETF, and as such, has a higher historical return, but it's also more volatile than VOO. And in the event of a stock market crash, it will almost certainly crash harder, but it will most likely recover sharper as well. I like VGT because I still think our future as a society is tech heavy, and therefore I invest in tech. And lastly, to round out the bunch, I think a good dividend ETF can be a good choice for those who are not just after total returns, but usable returns in the form of a dividend. For this, I think a good option is SCHD, but another choice is NOBL. Both of these are dividend-heavy ETFs, and their primary goal is to generate their investors a dividend return. With that said, NOBL has a slightly higher volatility than SCHD, and as such, it will swing more. With that said, the whole point of passive investing is utilizing time to your advantage. So in the long run, the swings in NOBL or SCHD or VGT or VOO should just be small bumps in the road.